taking the time. This is OWEB's presentation about the Restoration and Technical Assistance Grant offering using the Natural and Working Lands funds. And again, really happy to see the attendance, so many people interested in this grant offering, and hope that in the next hour I can provide some information that might be helpful to the application process. So I know this is set up in a webinar structure where you all can't see each other, but we'll be taking questions and trying to collate them where they're similar. And I'll pause throughout if people want to type them into the chat. And I also want to introduce a couple of my colleagues from OWEB. Eric Williams is the Restoration Grants Program Manager, and we'll be helping to answer some of the questions around the restoration and technical assistance offering. Taylor Larson is the Oregon Ag Heritage Program Coordinator and works on the conservation management plans, which I'll be touching on in a little bit. And Ellen is our grant support specialist and is helping me with some of the technical details today. So let's see. Ellen, do you want to say anything about how to type questions in or how to access kind of technical resources in the webinar mode?
Sure. There are two ways for you to ask questions or flag me for help if you need support. There's a questions option, should be down at the middle of your screen beneath the presentation where the chat box usually is. And then you also have a raise hand function. Either of those will get our attention, and then when Alexa pauses for questions, we'll be able to either let you speak or read your question out loud.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's see here. So for our agenda today, I'll be providing a brief overview of the funds, but I know that many of the participants have attended earlier listening sessions. So I do want to spend the majority of our time together talking about the grant offering and the process. But first, just for a little bit of background, these funds were designated as part of House Bill 3409, which passed in 2023 to support a number of wide-ranging activities with the aim of reducing Oregon's emissions and building climate resilience. So the activities included in House Bill 3409 included things like support for heat pump rebates, rebates for zero-emission vehicles, as well as $10 million for the Natural and Working Lands Fund. This fund is split across 4 state agencies who have each proposed activities to the Oregon Climate Action Commission in line with the legislation. So Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife are using the money that they received to implement a number of their own restoration projects across Oregon's various landscapes. And these are projects that they have identified in their strategic plans. Oregon Department of Agriculture has been providing technical assistance for invasive annual grasses in Oregon rangelands and has already distributed money to tribes for native seed projects. Lastly, OWEB is unique in that we are using the funds solely for grant making, which allows the funding to be responsive to community needs as long as it is within the scope of the legislation. So our commitments in making funding decisions include the 4 bullets, bottom bullets here on this slide, which is that we are to prioritize projects which are administered by or in consultation with tribes or environmental justice communities. And I'll talk a little bit more about the definition of that in the next slide. OWEB is also to support projects that leverage additional funding wherever possible. And we are to support projects that incorporate community co-benefits in the design, including social, health, economic, or climate resilience benefits. So to touch on the definitions in the legislation, natural climate solutions includes activities which protect enhance, or restore natural ecological functions that support carbon sequestration and storage. So this is a little bit different from industrial carbon capture and storage, which might include technology, but these are really natural functions on the landscape. And then the definition of environmental justice community is outlined in House Bill 4077, which includes a wide range of communities throughout Oregon. And I recognize that this definition is quite broad. However, I think the important language to consider is the latter part, saying that those communities are also underrepresented in public processes and adversely harmed by environmental and health hazards. So there's a intersecting component between those communities and being underrepresented in public processes. So I'll stop there and just pause to see if there are any questions before I keep going. Ellen, do we have anything?
I am seeing no. Oh, yes, we do. Neil, I'm going to unmute or allow you to talk so you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Was it 10 million allocation for the biennium?
Yes. However, it does not have to be, projects do not have to be completed in the biennium. So that was allocated, but projects can extend over a longer time span.
And how long? I'm sure you'll get to that, but I'm curious how long the time span is.
Yeah, so within OWEB, there's no set timeline for restoration and technical assistance grants. However, we typically see restoration being about 5 years and technical assistance being about 2. But that's really up to kind of the coordination between the program manager and the grantee.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. Anything else?
I'm seeing no other questions and no other hands.
Okay, perfect. So to go into the structure of our grant offering, in keeping with the legislative intent to leverage existing programs, OWEB's proposal to the Climate Action Commission outlined two current grant programs through which we'd administer the Natural and Working Lands funds. So Taylor is here with me today because we proposed that 750,000 would go to the development and implementation of conservation management plans on agricultural land. And he's already done a webinar about that program last week. It's up on our YouTube. If you are interested in conservation management plans, I would encourage you to check out that webinar. And then the second grant pathway is the one that I'm speaking about in more detail today. That's the 1.5 million for restoration and technical assistance projects. And these have a $500,000 maximum award amount and a 5% match requirement. And then I do just want to note briefly, Eric can speak more about this if there are additional questions, but within the technical assistance offering, there are two kind of choices to pursue: either design and engineering funding for the technical design of restoration projects, or a resources assessment and planning, which can support the development of a restoration plan. So both of the technical assistance kind of headers are to support the eventual implementation of restoration work, but to do some of the pre-work for those projects.
We have an eligibility question, which fits right into this slide. Are local government agencies eligible to apply?
So state or state agencies are not eligible. Eric, could you help me with the local government?
Sure, thanks, Alexa. Yes, local governments are eligible to apply for all of the grant documents.
Perfect. Any other questions on that?
Nope, you're good to go.
All right, so for the eligible practices, this list came from the Institute for Natural Resources 2023 Roadmap to Increase Carbon Sequestration and Storage in Oregon. And with the exception of prescribed and cultural burns, which we have added based on feedback from the public engagement process, these are INR's practices that were recommended because they are most likely to be effective in reducing greenhouse gas emissions based on available science. So these practices met criteria, including that they lead to enhancements in carbon uptake or reductions that are additional to what would have occurred in a baseline scenario. They also achieve durable storage by accounting to the extent possible for social and environmental risks to the storage project. So, for example, landowner behavior or land management that might change the practices that are sequestering or storing carbon on that land. The practices here also attempt to account for leakage so that gains in one area don't shift activities to another area. So an example of this might be a reduction in crop yield that ultimately leads to harmful production practices in another area. So the INR has attempted to account for some of the issues of durability and leakage in the practices that they have selected. You'll also note that I've not included agricultural lands because we anticipate that most interest will be in the conservation management plans for people interested in working on agricultural land. But I think there could certainly be a scenario where someone might be interested in a restoration or technical assistance project on agricultural land, and that would be eligible. So if you're interested in something like that, please feel free to reach out. So I'll pause again here and open for any questions, but I do want to just ask that we try to keep them as broad and relevant to other participants as possible, and that if you're interested in really specific or technical questions, you reach out for a pre-application consultation. Ellen, do we have any questions?
We have one typed out question, and if you have a verbal one, a reminder that you can raise your hand. In the question box, if a TA grant is awarded, does it imply the project could be eligible for other OWEB funding?
Eric, I'll look to you to help with that. Although I think I know the answer, I want to be sure to get it right.
Sure, thanks. The implication is certainly there that you're doing the TA to lead up to an eligible project. I think the caveat that I would add to that, and I'll just use a generic example of a restoration project that's, let's say, trying to restore some riparian habitat. And they use a TA grant and go through an alternatives analysis. And that analysis might end up showing that none of the restoration options are feasible. And whatever is left that they can do would not be eligible. But generally speaking, the implication is that the product of a TA grant should be somewhere on the pathway to an eligible restoration.
Perfect. Thank you.
We have several more coming in now.
I thought we might.
Yeah.
Will you read them?
Yes. Erica asks, when you say expand forest vegetation cover, does that apply to shrubs and forbs or just trees?
It applies to perennial plants. So yes, shrubs and forbs would be included in that.
Then Andrea asks, is this grant limited to a certain geographic area or anywhere statewide?
Anywhere statewide.
And Laura asks, am I right in hearing that these funds are not for the on-the-ground work, but are more geared toward the planning ahead of a restoration project?
Not quite, and I appreciate the question just so that I can clarify. There are two offerings that I'm speaking about today. So the technical assistance offering is for the planning, as you mentioned, and then the restoration grant offering is for the implementation, so the on-the-ground work. And they don't have to be sequential, right? You don't need to do the technical assistance to get a restoration. You can come in and apply for a restoration project if you already have a plan in place.
Great. And then one more. Oh, and then more coming in. When you say prevent conversion to juniper woodlands, does that include cutting down juniper?
This, I believe so, but I would have to go back to the report and double check. So the report is linked in the deck, and I'll include it in the email that I send around afterwards. And for those who might watch later on YouTube, we'll include in the comments section of the presentation there.
Yeah, I just add on that with juniper cutting that really the goal there is the couple of bullets that you see under rangelands on the slide that's on the screen now, restoring deep-rooted perennial grasses to areas impacted by invasive species. If you just cut the juniper and don't address that component of it, you may not achieve the objective of restoring those deep-rooted rangeland systems. And so I think the juniper cutting itself certainly is a part of it, but the other part is paying attention to what remains or restoring what remains after the juniper's cut.
Perfect. Thank you. Other questions, Ellen?
We have one that is talking about priorities, and I'm assuming you're going to show us our priority matrix somewhere in this slide deck. So I think maybe we'll hold on to that one.
Okay. Yeah, I have a few more decks about, or sorry, slides about the considerations. But if I don't get to it specifically,
I will keep it in the queue.
perfect.
And then we have a specific question, but I think this does apply to people broadly. Catherine asks if we have a tidal restoration project that we are unsure will provide net greenhouse gas sequestration and want to test that hypothesis with TA funding, would that assessment be eligible?
That's a good question. Eric, do you have a sense for whether that would be a restoration or technical assistance or more of a monitoring type grant?
Yeah, that feels more like a monitoring grant where you're measuring the effectiveness of the restoration rather than a TA design or funding project.
Is there any
All right.
follow-up to that question?
That's what I've got. I will keep an eye on it.
Perfect. So this is the application timeline over the next couple of months. The application is currently open, so if you go to the Natural and Working Lands site on OWEB's page, it links to how to apply. Applications are due April 1st, and then the review team will meet in mid-May to make recommendations to the OWEB board, which will then meet towards the end of July and make their decision. The awards, once they're funded, can start as soon as the board makes those decisions. So late July or whenever the grantee would like to get started on activities. And as I mentioned, the term for those grants are up to about 5 years for restoration and about 2 for technical assistance, although there isn't any kind of set timeline. Grantees can propose what they think works best for them. So I did want to call out a couple of specific application questions that are unique to the Natural and Working Lands funds. For those who are familiar with OWEB's open solicitation offering, the application will look very similar. However, there are a couple of additions and changes to 2 questions. The first is a new question about the social context of the project, which is designed to provide the review team with some more information about the project to help meet the legislative intent, and also to encourage applicants to think about those community co-benefits. So the restoration or technical assistance project is really incorporating human communities and well-being into their design as well. And then the second is a slight modification to an existing question to specifically mention tribes and environmental justice communities, in addition to OWEB's current question about communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. So this is nearly the same question, but just really wanted to call out the communities that were mentioned in the legislation. And these links that I'm including in the deck are also included in the application guidance. So once you make a account and log in, each application question has small kind of information buttons that you can hover over for examples and evaluation criteria that we're looking for in each question. And these links are also included there. I'm not sure if this is the matrix that you were referring to, but we've made as kind of a diagram to help think through the natural climate solutions at the intersection of community co-benefits. It's not required in the application, but I thought it might be a helpful kind of framework to look at the intersection of community health, other social benefits, and potential economic benefits to the project, really to get at the first question in the previous slide. And then I wanted to touch on the composition of the review team. This is a number of individuals who are selected from the public, and people that I am currently trying to convene to review the Natural and Working Lands projects. So hoping to include someone with soil science expertise, someone to represent urban, rural, tribal, and environmental justice communities. And that kind of cohort of people will be working to review each project and then provide ranked recommendations for funding to the OWEB board. So I'll stop there and just open it up for questions. This is my contact information. Email or phone are fine. And I'll do whatever I can to answer technical questions on the call, but might have to follow up for really specific design questions. And I'm always open to pre-app consultations in the coming weeks. So I can see Neil's hand raised, but I don't think I can see any others. Ellen, will you help me with questions?
Yeah, Neil, why don't you go ahead and then we will tackle the written questions.
Thank you, Alan. A quick question is just about the process, and I apologize if I missed this. For restoration project applications, will there be site visits by a review team similar to open solicitation?
That's a good question. I am still trying to figure out whether we'll do site visits. I'm not sure that that will be possible with the time that we have because it's a little bit of a condensed timeline, shorter than the regular open solicitation. So I'm not sure that that will be possible this spring.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to try and group our written questions, but we will not be skipping over any of them. So if I move past yours, please don't panic. Do we have to apply for just a technical assistance or restoration grant, or can we combine both types?
Eric, would you help me with that one?
Yeah, happy to. It's a question we get frequently in open solicitation, and it really does depend on the project. If you're combining TA and restoration into one, it's essentially a design build project. I think where the challenges come into play is if there's enough unanswered questions as you're going through the design process, it's hard to gauge what your restoration design and budget is going to be. And so that can make it difficult to try to put those into one application because there's too many unknowns for the restoration component. And often our feedback from technical review teams back to applicants when they submit design build projects is to split that out to do a TA project first so that you're on firmer ground when you spec out what the restoration project looks like.
Thank you. Uh, and then we have some questions about priorities. I'm going to try and group together. One is, will there be different priorities given for certain project scales? Is a larger project, geographically speaking, more desirable than a smaller scale one?
No, I would say that meeting the legislative intent is a higher priority than the landscape scale. Um, However, in the evaluation criteria, there's a number of targets just for the durability of the projects, right? Looking at the extent to which it continues on the landscape. Eric, do you want to jump in for any other questions on scale? Or
No, I think you hit it. I think that's right on.
So on a similar line, different metric, Tyler asked, by saying there's no set timeline, does that mean 5 years and 2 years are not necessarily maximums, or only that projects with shorter timelines are still eligible?
those are not necessarily maximums.
And shorter
Tyler.
timelines are fine.
Yeah. If that doesn't answer the question, Tyler, please rephrase it for us. We have another one. You mentioned agricultural projects, but agriculture is not on one of the previous slides. Does that mean restoring ag fields to prairie habitat would be eligible or ineligible?
That would be eligible. Taylor, do you want to take a stab at that under a CMP or a restoration grant?
Yeah, I can take a quick stab at it. So I think the distinction between the conservation management planning program and the open solicitation programs Alexis is talking about right now is whether or not in your example, ag field would stay in some form of agriculture or would be moving toward a habitat first focus. So if the idea is to convert the plant composition to prairie plants, but still with the primary purpose of raising livestock, it would likely be a better fit for the Ag Heritage Program, the conservation management planning. Whereas if the primary focus were the prairie habitat, and there may be a continued grazing component, but really what you're trying to do is restore the functioning of the prairie, would likely be a better fit for a restoration grant. And Eric, jump in if you have some nuance to add there.
Yeah, no, I think you've got quite a bit of nuance in there. I had taken the question to mean a permanent conversion from ag to non-ag use. And yeah, Taylor's right on. That would be a restoration project. If there's proposed continuation of ag uses, then it's probably a better fit for conservation management plan.
Thanks, everybody. And then we just have some logistics questions now. Will this grant be impacted by any changes that might be made at the federal level?
No, these funds are legislatively appropriated by the state. However, I do want to note the match requirement. OWEB recognizes that the federal funding situation is very fluid and unknown at this point, and so we're committed to providing flexibility and working with grantees to navigate that as best we can. But these funds are legislatively appropriated at the state level and will not change as a result of federal decisions. Neil? Or sorry, Ellen, if there's other logistics, why don't we
If
start?
Neil's question is directly related to that, I think let him
Perfect.
go ahead.
I was just going to ask if the uniform guidance that raised the de minimis over administrative rate from 10 to 15% is applicable to this program.
It is, yes.
Okay, on a semi-related note to that, are grants through this offering able to be used as match for OWEB, OS, or FIP grants?
Eric, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that OWEB funding cannot be used as match for other OWEB funding, but it can be used as match for other private or federal match requirements.
Yes, you are correct. You cannot use these funds to match an open solicitation or FIP grant or any other OLED grant.
And a clarification question, 1.5 million is available for this spring cycle. Since there was 10 million allotted for the biennium, I assume there will be future cycles?
Yeah, thanks for that question, and sorry for the confusion. The 10 million is the overall fund, which went to 4 state agencies. So OWEB received about 2.25 million to provide as grants, and that 2.25 is split between the conservation management plans on ag land and the 1.5 million for restoration and technical assistance projects. So as of right now, we don't know about additional funding, although we certainly hope that there's an opportunity to continue these activities in the future. Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I was speaking and I had muted myself. That was my bad. Some new program questions. How many applications do you usually receive and how many of them do you usually fund?
So this is a new grant offering, and I don't really know. We haven't done this before. So I'm not totally sure what we will expect for what we can expect for interest in the program. Eric, do you have kind of a percentage of funding applications received versus funded for general open solicitation?
Yeah, that's right around half. Um, About half of the funds requested are awarded in a typical cycle.
And do you have a sense, knowing that this is a new program, of whether you will be awarding many small grants or a few large grants?
Again, since we really don't know what to expect for proposals, I think we will have to see kind of what comes in to make the determination. So we have the 1.5 million to spend overall, and we'll be looking across both restoration and technical assistance applications as we make the ranked decision for that 1.5 million. But I think that it will likely be a mix of larger and smaller grant amounts.
Then we have two questions about combining projects. The first one, can the TA funding be used for Section 106, reviews for projects? And can a bundle of projects needing this review be combined for a TA grant?
I'm going to look to you, Eric, for help with that one.
Sure. Yeah, the cultural resources section 106 permitting are eligible activities under our TA grant program. I think the challenge here is talking about the projects that they're associated with and how that's advancing the natural and working lands climate solutions goals. So I would say it's eligible. I think the challenge there is really hitting on first of all, the likelihood that the projects would come in to successful completion and how those projects are advancing the goals of this program. And for the second part of that, that is eligible under open solicitation to combine section 106 permitting for a couple of sites. And again, I think your narrative challenge there is talking about how the collective actions are advancing the goals of this program. So certainly eligible, but we're thinking about how that is explained in the application with respect to the guidance and the district program.
Okay, on a very related note, so the may have already been answered in that, Eric. Could a project work with multiple landowners or encompass many small projects, like restoring several 5 to 20 acre plots instead of one 100-acre plot?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again the challenge there is in your narrative describing how they tie together and how collectively as a whole they're meeting the goals of the program.
All right, and we're down to one-off topic questions at this point, but please feel free to add more to the question box if you have more questions. From Michael, if we have a project idea, is it best to talk to our regional program representative, our RPR, about this grant, or talk to Alexa?
Both and, please. Yeah, it'd be great to reach out to both of us.
And then an anonymous question, can restoration funds be used to purchase equipment to be used in restoration activities, like equipment for juniper removal, milling logs into lumber, and conversion of slash to biochar?
I don't think that would not be eligible under the Natural and Working Lands funds for sure. Eric, would that be eligible under larger restoration funding?
Yeah, I think since they're not eligible for the Natural and Working Lands funds, it probably doesn't matter. There are some avenues for purchasing equipment in the open solicitation grant program, but there are some restrictions on that. For example, equipment must reside with the grantee, and there must be some explanation of how they're going to make that equipment available for other uses, more broadly. But since those purchases aren't eligible for the NWL funds, then certainly.
Then we have another question about match. Can match be from a task completed before the project started, but directly impacting the project?
That is generally eligible under OWEB programs. There has to be a reasonable timing nexus to the project, and it has to be clear that it is necessary for successful completion of the project. But yes, that would be acceptable as match.
And then I think we have two more that haven't been answered yet. Is there a preference for habitat restoration projects taking place on public versus privately owned lands?
No, there isn't a preference.
And just a application question, should we have all the landowners and properties identified ahead of time for the grant, or is a general target area okay?
Is this for a restoration project?
That is not specified. For technical assistance.
So let's see. It would certainly be a more competitive application if the landowners were identified beforehand. I think it would be hard to make the case that this would lead to a future restoration project if that was unclear at the for the application for technical assistance.
And then Christina asked if there is a minimum number of acreage to be restored.
No, there's not.
Okay, and our last two questions that we have already been answered previously, so I'll go ahead and type answers into those.
Perfect.
We had a Sorry. It sounds like technical assistance grants would be better to apply to if there's not yet a robust plan in place for restoration.
Absolutely. Yes, that's what they're designed for.
And that's all I have.
Great. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining, for your time and your interest in the program. Appreciate you, Eric and Taylor, for helping answer some questions that I wasn't able to answer, and to Ellen for helping facilitate. As I said before, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself and your regional program manager if you're interested in applying and have additional questions, especially as you get into more of the technical details around what might be eligible. So really excited about rolling out these funds and looking forward to the applications that come in. Thank you, everyone.